Hi, welcome to the stream. So I'm Ben, I'm the UI programmer at Brace Yourself. I'm working on Titan right now. Welcome, how's the audio? Is it loud enough? Hi Nick. If I'm a little bit quiet. There we go, maybe that's better. Okay. Audio is good. Ah, thanks, Ryan. Bump that down a little bit more. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm the UI programmer designer at Brace Yourself Games, and today I'm gonna talk to you all about typography and fonts and stuff. And so, yeah, ask questions as we go. But you can always, like, if you have questions that you want to see, want me to like have a look in depth at some screenshots of your games, we can post those at the end, and then I can look through them and like give feedback if you want. Yeah. So let me put the slideshow up. There we go. What's the deal with Comic Sans? Well, I'm going to get to that. That's definitely going to be... That's a whole section in this, kind of. Okay. So let's start. Which keyboard is it? We got like 3 keyboards in here. There we go. It's that keyboard. So today, this hopefully will be useful for people if you're a game developer, or if you're just interested in game development in general, or you're just interested in fonts. This hopefully will give you some skills and stuff by the end of like listening to me ramble on for an hour. So like often I find when I first started this thing, I was never sure, how do I pick a font for my game? Like, is there such a thing as like the best font or a good font versus a bad font? And yeah, hopefully this should give you an insight into like, some sort of rules or methodology for like how to choose fonts and typefaces. And then also hopefully it should make stuff nicer for your players as well. So they actually, people often skip through text and stuff in games. I know I do that, but hopefully with some of these kind of guidelines that people might actually enjoy it a bit more reading text. And then you can also be a really insufferable font snob if you want, which is it's fun to be able to do that sometimes. It's not required. So yeah, if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat as we go. But then at the end you can always like put in, you can like link screenshots and stuff like that. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of history because it helps with context, I think, of like, when we talk about fonts, what do we talk about? So humans invented writing like a long time ago. So skip over that. There's a whole bunch of different writing systems, whatever, thousands of years of history, evolution, and, deciding what kind of typefaces and things. Blah. Okay, this is where things get interesting, for us at least. So in sort of 1000 AD, 1200 AD, in Korea and in China, people invented this thing called movable type. And so you have these individual blocks of characters, of letters, and you can kind of reuse them and rearrange them, and you can print hundreds of things off this one kind of sheet. So it's like movable. And in English, they look like this. You have these little blocks of metal with letters on them individually. And you can see they're all mirror imaged there because, when you print it, it gets mirrored again, so it comes out the right way around. And so you'll have an actual case of letters. So you'd have your larger letters in the uppercase, and then you'd have your small letters in the lowercase. So like when we talk about uppercase and lowercase, it's actually like actual cases of bits of metal that you then print from, which is kind of cool. I don't know, it's nice to have little pointless etymology, things like that, to be able to impress your friends with. So yeah, this is what they look like, little drawers, and then you can compose them together to print things out. And so you can lay them out quite nicely like this. You see there's like some gaps in between the letters there to create some spacing. You can even see, if I can get my mouse here, you can see they've even got some sort of decorative bits that are all mirrored, and nice bits of spacing there. This is all made out of lead, by the way, so that's a really nice health hazard there. So you might go crazy eventually, but you'll get some really nice prints in the meantime. Okay, so oh yeah, these things are originally called founts because it was from the French fondre, which is like to like melt or to smelt or to like a foundry, right? It's the same etymology, and then they eventually changed the spelling into fonts. So a font is like people often are like confused between, like, I hear the word typeface and I hear the word font. If you think about the actual kind of history of it, a font is like a cast set of metal letters. It's like one size, so 12 point, and one style, so let's say bold. And you would cast all those as one set, bunch of uppercase letters, lowercase letters. That's one font. And then you might have a different font, which is the same kind of style, but 24-point font, 24-point size. So now you have two fonts, and those make up a typeface. So like in all the UIs and stuff you see when you're choosing your font, you're technically choosing a typeface, and then you choose a size, and that makes a font. But yeah, no one really, I'm going to use the wrong word consistently, like all the way through this next presentation. So it doesn't matter that much really. It's just, it helps when you think about the history. Okay. So that's enough history. So, what about video games? Why should we care about like fonts and typefaces and things in video games? Well, video games have text, which you may or may not have noticed. Some games have more text, some games have less text, but there is text in video games. And so how you present that text is, up to you, but there's like a lot of kind of artistic stuff, and then also kind of usability stuff that comes into that. So these are a bunch of screenshots of like, text appears in games in many different ways. Can be small stuff, can be big stuff, can be stylish, can be pretty simple. So, okay, so like as a sort of general, person that's just coming into this from scratch, like, what do you know about fonts? You might know like a couple of names of fonts you've heard of. You might know some things about like, I've heard of serif and sans serif. So ignoring Comic Sans, the most famous font ever, you might have heard of sans serif font and a serif font, or typeface. And so those are like big categories. You could see like a sans serif doesn't have any of the kind of decorative bits on it, and then serif font has these kind of decorative serifs on it. So those are kind of interesting categories, but there's actually a more useful way of categorizing fonts and typefaces, and I'm gonna tell you that now. So it's way more useful when you're thinking about typography and thinking about fonts and things, is to categorize them by like what they were made for. So fonts and typefaces and things are not designed just sort of, however. Like the artist who creates them has a very specific purpose in mind when they create a typeface. And talking about the first one, we're going to talk about display typefaces. So a display typeface is one that is big and bold and has a really specific feeling to it. For example, if we start with Lobster here, you look at that. These are all the names of the fonts, the typefaces, by the way. See, I'm going to say fonts all the time when I really should say typefaces. But anyway, whatever. Lobster here is like kind of makes you feel think about 50s diners, or kind of the American West, or I don't know. I mean, it sort of has that sort of stylish feeling to it, compared to Monotone here, which it's got those lines, which makes it feel like maybe sort of 70s. You think disco, lots of kind of avocado bathrooms and wood paneled walls. It's sort of stylish and swish. And Pacifico feels like maybe 60s surfing kind of style. Rancho is obviously kind of maybe Mexican or like South kind of Texan or style like that. Lucky's Guy's Comic. So these all have really specific feelings associated with them. And the whole point about them is you're really trying to communicate like a feeling or a theme. And they work really well at large sizes. They're basically there to catch the eye and to be useful in headings and titles and things. So in contrast to that are body typefaces. So you've got display and body. And body typefaces are called that because they're used for body text. So like large bits of text. Imagine like newspapers, novels, anything that's more than a couple of words. And so even within this category, you've got Times New Roman, which is a famous one. That's a serif font. You've got a sans serif thing down here, Nunito, Verdana. And so the aim of these is to, so the aim of them is to communicate content. Like they sort of the actual style of the typeface takes a backseat to the actual content of like what's being written. One of the other things about them is they come in many weights. So a weight is, as you see here, bold is like a very heavy weight, and then light is the name of a lighter, skinnier sort of font. And so these kind of body typefaces often have many different varieties like that, because you might think, okay, in this situation I want some bold, in this situation I want some light, and display fonts wouldn't usually support that. So body typefaces also have support for italics, where a display typeface might not. Some of them do, some of them don't. Also, one thing to note about italics here, as a little side note. So italics is not just taking the original characters and then like shifting it, 30 degrees to the side. It's actually like a completely different set of characters. So for example, you look at the I in medium here, they've actually kind of chopped off the left-hand side of the foot here, of the serif, and they've tilted it, and it's kind of slightly thinner. These are all much more, italics is from cursive stuff, so it looks a bit more handwritten than something like this M looks very printed, like they've chopped off the bottom legs on the M there, try and make it look a little bit more handwritten. Anyway. So yeah, so body typefaces, they're there for communicating content specifically, rather than style. But they do have some sort of stylish elements to them, which I'll cover in a second. They're specifically designed to work at small sizes. So when you've got your large amount of text, you don't want to have it at 35 point. You're going to have to squish it down to 14, and these will work well even at a smaller size. So when I said before that they don't have any style to them, that's not correct. They do have some style. So for example, you could, if you use a serif typeface that for your body, it sort of feels like printed media. So it might make you think of newspapers or 1900s or even earlier. And alternatively, you could have kind of like a slab or typewriter style, to make it feel like something that someone's maybe typed or is not published in the same way that a written book is. It's sort of more raw. Or you could go sans serif and you could still, make it seem minimal and futuristic. Okay. If anybody has any questions about this stuff, then yeah, just jump in and throw in questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep rambling on. So this is trying to show if you actually use a display typeface, like this is actually the font we talked about earlier, the kind of 50s diner one. Like it doesn't work super well at that size, and this is actually relatively large. Like as you go smaller, it's going to become even harder to read. But the same text in a font that was a typeface that was designed for large amounts of text is just way easier to read. There's way more space between the letters. It's like, yeah, night and day. You might think it doesn't make a huge difference in this small amount of text, but if you imagine reading an entire book in this display typeface, it's going to tire people out. Okay, so here's like a summary of this sort of section. So if you learn, if you learn one thing from today, it's basically the difference between display typefaces and body typefaces. When you're choosing them, we'll talk about this more later, but if you can kind of think like, oh, when I'm choosing this font, is it really a display typeface or a body typeface? What is it designed for? I should make sure I use it in the way that it's kind of intended. So don't write your entire game in that grape vibes thing. You could do the alternative if you really wanted to use a body typeface as your for your titles and stuff. You could, but you might be kind of sacrificing on some of the flavor you could put in your game. So if you say you're going for like a 70s vibe game. You could choose like Zilla and use that everywhere. But I mean, if you've got the big size and space, you might be able to show more kind of feeling by putting in monotone or something. Because it's like painting with less colors if you just use body typefaces everywhere. Okay, so that's kind of the baseline, and then from there I'm going to go through a bunch of kind of little concrete ways to improve your typography or your the text within your game, and a lot of it is based on that idea of the two different categories. Okay, well, I'm glad you're enjoying it, Andy and Forbit. Hey, what's up? Okay, so this is, along with like the display and body typefaces thing, this is probably the other most important thing of like how I go about choosing typefaces and kind of setting up a system, is you want to create a style guide. I don't know if that's the proper term for it, but that's kind of what I thought sounded right. So a style guide is basically you pick a couple of typefaces and you pick a couple of sizes and styles, and you use that to define how your game will look. You'll notice this with websites, with printed stuff. Once you start thinking about it, you can really spot it basically anywhere people have done typography stuff. So for example, say I was going to make like a 1950s diner game, like you're running around like filling out burgers and doing all that kind of stuff, I might decide like, okay, my header text is all going to be in lobster, and I'm going to make it red because that fits with my feel. And then I want to be able to have something in between, and then, okay, let's go to body first. And then the body, 12 point is big enough, it's not too small. I'm going to put in a bit of line spacing, and I'm going to keep it white to keep it readable because our background's black for whatever reason. And then I want a bit of more flexibility, so I want to add in another style, which I'm going to make Georgia 18 point, make it all caps, and yeah, this is enough. So I've got 3 styles. That's like a good baseline. So I can use that in many different situations. So I could be like, oh, I'm going to set up a menu in the game. And so I use my head for the top, and then I can put in some body, and then I can put my subhead in, and then I can do more body. And so by setting up these styles and reusing them everywhere, the consistency helps kind of players understand the importance of stuff. So they're like, oh, if it's in red, it's really important. If it's all in caps, it's kind of important, and then everything else is body. And it's so much easier when you're a designer, because you don't have to every time you put in some text, you don't want to be like, well, I'll make this one 14 point, and I'll make this one 17, and I'll make this one 12. You just end up with a big mess. If you can centrally define these and reuse them everywhere, it's really useful. And if people are like, oh, the body is kind of hard to read, you can just bump it from 12 point to 13 point and just have it apply everywhere, and it's consistent. So yeah, we can see this in other games. So this is Industries of Titan. I thought I should throw in our game. This is kind of what I've done for ours. So titles I put in yellow in this kind of tall, thin font. The reason we picked that is because I'm trying to go for sort of an Art Deco corporate feel. So this kind of tall, skinny font works really well. That's the Phantom Brigade team totally helped with that. That was like their original idea. And then we've used kind of like a slightly wider, I think it's called EXO font for the subtitles. I put that in bold, and then for the body, just regular old, just normal size. And you can see how I've used that on the right. So like subtitles, like donate to counselor here, the title's up there in yellow and stands out. And then yeah, I've just sort of mix and match things. And I've actually got a 4th size down here for like flavor text. So you can kind of add or remove as many styles as you want, but I would try and keep the list as small as possible. Less than 3 is probably not enough. More than 6 or 7, you're going to make a mess, and you're going to have too much flexibility. So like 3 or 4, maybe 5 is probably good. That gives you some flexibility to use it in different places. And then also I have exceptions. So like in this case, this button is disabled, and so the color is actually darker, and it's not any of the ones I've technically defined in my style, but it's a button. I need to communicate the state, so there's a little bit of flexibility there. I've kept the same size at least. Okay, so yeah. Wait, did I have more screenshots? Oh yeah, I did. Let's do more screenshots first. That's way more fun. So this is Splatoon 2, I think. And you can see how they have used the same kind of idea. So their display typeface is this custom-made, kind of goopy, fun-looking, kind of comic booky font that they've used for like headers and subheaders and things, even for the numbers over here. And then their body typeface is fairly simple. It's just a pretty normal looking sans serif font. It's fairly wide, but yeah, they haven't tried to like. Often I see game developers try and force too much flavor into like every piece of text, and I know I did that at the start. I'm like, oh, it's a comic booky game, so the titles need to be comic book style, and then the body needs to be comic book style, and it just makes the game quite hard to read because you're trying to put everything with like so much flavor when you really don't need it. There's enough other stuff around to make you think, oh, comic booky, from the title image to the background colors and things. So yeah, just go simpler on the body, and have the flavor in your display typeface. Oh, Hoaxfish says, if you're doing fantasy or sci-fi, do you start with a regular group for those genres, or is it just down to a fresh choice each time? So it depends. So what do you mean group? I guess you mean group of fonts. For example, if I was going sci-fi, there's a bunch of different versions of sci-fi. Like, do you mean Star Wars? Is it sci-fi fantasy, or is it kind of grounded? Is it digital? Is it kind of oppressive? Definitely for sci-fi, you would probably avoid a serif font because that might feel too, I don't know, not modern enough. And almost vice versa for fantasy. Fantasy is kind of old often. It depends on the fantasy. This is the thing, it's quite hard without actually knowing the exact game. But anyway, for fantasy, you might go more towards a serif for the body, and then for the display, it kind of depends on what you're going to do. Like, if your fantasy game is all about, like, I don't know, kind of warring factions of orcs and stuff, and like really kind of gritty, you might have like a really kind of brush strokey display font to make it feel really raw. Or maybe it's about like dwarves underground. You might want to have something that looks like it's like hammered out and really kind of made out of iron for your display. So yeah, I think I usually start with the display first, because that's like your full color palette. You can go really crazy with that and have lots of different styles. And then the body, you have to pull it back and go for something relatively simple. Does that answer your question? Yeah. You say a fresh choice each time. I usually try and look through stuff I have already or stuff I know of. I can talk a bit later about how to choose, how to like actually go and search for fonts, because that's like another kind of exercise in itself. But yeah, remember me later if I didn't cover that. But yeah, how to find fonts it's fun. It's like going hunting. Toma Barkin says, what about some more funky games, say Don't Starve style? Can you think of types of body fonts that would match those styles yet still remain readable? Yeah, for Don't Starve, that's a good question. I'm kind of curious what Don't Starve looks like now, actually. I think the thing is that I wouldn't go too funky or interesting in the body font for that. I would put it in the display, in the title, and the body actually itself I would keep fairly simple. Like, from what I know of Don't Starve, I'd probably go, it doesn't really matter either way. I don't know whether you'd go for a serif or a sans serif in the body, but you basically have to rely on the display to really make the game feel the way it feels. Also, you have to kind of admit, as a UI person, you are kind of secondary to the art. Yeah, as Thomas said, that they have funky fonts, but they have very little text. So you don't want to kind of break the feeling with the font stuff, but you don't have to rely on your text being the only way to add flavor, because they've got all of the art and animation and stuff. Piet says, one thing I like in this Splatoon screenshot is entirely this separate display font made of alphabet. Oh yeah, that's a whole other thing, is they've got this completely made up alphabet that they throw around in quite a lot of different places. It's actually in the background here, and it feels like it is almost written in the same font face typeface as this. They actually made this typeface completely from scratch. There was like nothing that they liked that was, I guess, looked like paint and squids enough, so they just wrote something from scratch that works in English and Japanese. It's really cool. There's a whole like talk and stuff online you can go and find by them. Okay, this is Overwatch, so this is a totally different style again, but they've gone for kind of, this is their title font, title display typeface that works really well at large sizes. It's Overwatch is like comic booky, but they haven't gone for like a comic booky hand-drawn style. They've gone all caps and this italic kind of really dynamic style. The whole thing is supposed to feel like an action comic. So it's like the text itself is italicized. Yeah, I think Hoax, I think the I don't know if I've ever seen a non-italicized version of this, so I think this is the normal, and then I think there is no italic version of the font of the typeface. Which is slightly confusing. It's basically there to look dynamic and like it's about to kind of like go and take off and do something cool. And then there's their subhead, and then you've got kind of their, I'm in the way, but that's their oops, I went the wrong way. Yeah, this is their like default kind of system font that they use for a lot of things. Yeah, this is Rocket League, so they have kind of a display typeface they're using for this up here. It's very thin, so it works best at larger sizes, like on playlists. There and ranked. They've actually increased the spacing in between the letters here, which is, I don't know, risky sometimes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but yeah, it doesn't work too bad here. And then their just sort of default body typeface is a really standard sans serif. But it doesn't look bad. Like, you've got enough flavor from the rest of the UI and from the titles here that you can go just really simple. Like, I really wouldn't, nobody's ever going to be like, oh, well, that sans serif font looks really boring in the body. Like, yeah, just go for something stylish in the display, and then the body can be totally normal. Let me go back for a second. Yeah. So yeah, this is kind of the summary of the whole style guide thing. So the whole point of having a small set of styles is you're trying to be consistent through your UI. I think it's hard to put your finger on, but I think players know that they feel something feels kind of crappy when there's different text of 100 different sizes all over. Like, sometimes it's in caps, sometimes it's not, completely different colors. There's some sort of, it feels messy. And so having a small list of styles that are flexible is important. And then, yeah, the balance between having a lot of styles and few styles, you want kind of a nice, flexible set of styles that are clearly separated from each other. So in this example, the header is clearly different from the subheader, and then the subheader is clearly different from the body. And so we're trying to, these are actually kind of maybe too close, but you really want like a really simple set of things you can reuse all over the place. And you can set those by changing the typeface and the size and the weight and things like that. Talking about typefaces, so some style guides I've seen mentioned online say you should only ever pick 2 typefaces for your entire UI. Some say you could pick 3. I think start with 2, that's probably enough, maybe 3 if you want. Like, you could have one typeface for your title, another one for your subtitle, another one for your body if you really wanted, but I don't know why you would necessarily want to do that. It gets kind of confusing because you might have 2 different display typefaces here, and then they might sort of pull in slightly different directions. Like, one might be more sci-fi than the other. So just start with 2, I think is a good thing. You can't go too wrong with that. And then, yeah, just for like an implementation thing, if you can define all of this style information somewhere in whatever engine or system you're using, it's going to save you so much hassle later on when someone inevitably comes back and says, oh, we want the game to work on blah, and so you have to change all of the body to be bigger, or you realize that the licensing has changed, or the color scheme means that you need to like change the colors for all of your titles. Centrally define these things. It's like CSS in HTML. Like try and put that in a single place. Okay. Does anyone have any more questions about this kind of like style, kind of category stuff? Because then after this, we're going to talk about kind of more individual little tricks and techniques. Okay. Right. So, well, this is one thing I see that people do wrong quite a lot in video games because it's hard to know about. So if you try and read that, as people read the ICK back and forth between when they reach the end of the line, and then your eye moves to the next line, eyes have to skip back and forth to work out which line they're on and which line is next. If your lines are extremely long, then it and these are the places. So like, this is actually not even that long. Like I've seen games that make lines of text even longer than this, like 150 characters long. And it's, well, you take a breath when you reach a full stop or a period. I kind of feel like I'm holding my breath until I hit the next line, and so it's like really tiring, and I sometimes lose my place. I'm like, oh, was I on the third line or the fourth line? Where am I? And so it's much easier to read much quicker, because you kind of see chunks of text as a whole, so you can kind of like jump way quicker along that second set of text. And so the guideline that I've seen online is like 45 to 70-ish characters per line. And even that, how many characters you have in your line is kind of an artistic choice. So if you have something really kind of tall and thin, each line very short, I don't know if this is just me, but I think it feels like very rapid. You kind of glancing very quickly down the lines. It feels like rushed or exciting. But something that's much wider feels much more relaxed, like you're reading a novel. So you could even put that in your game. If something's supposed to be really short and punchy, keep it like, obviously you keep the number of characters on the line short, but you also keep the text itself short. So yeah, don't make super long lines. That's pretty simple. The other thing about text is people don't actually read every letter in a word. When you're reading, you kind of glance at the shape of a word. So as I said there, people don't read by glancing every letter in a word and deciphering it. Instead, they skip across the line and determine the word by its shape. By using all caps, you rob them of that ability. So the word "the" you've seen a million times over. It's sort of like, okay, it's kind of tall on the first one, then you've got like a tall bit, and then kind of a low bit, and then the end is like a low kind of round shape. So you probably never even read the word "the," you just sort of glance at it. But when you change it to all caps, it's suddenly it's just this sort of square lump with like a little bit of a gap on the left-hand side. So it doesn't mean don't use all caps, but it means that like do it in small areas and some bits where they're not reading like huge amounts of text. Don't write your entire like visual novel in all caps. I mean, it sounds like you're shouting, and also it's kind of tiring to read. Yeah, as Andy says, you also sound 90% less angry. Yeah. This is another thing. All these three things are about making things readable, like slightly less tiring to read. So this is not super tightly spaced in terms of text. Like I've seen worse things than this, but this is 1x line spacing. You can kind of spread things out a little bit. That's 1.15. And then there's 1.5, which I think is almost too big. So I think for Titan we use 1.15 or 1.18 because when stuff's small, the 1x can feel really tight. It sort of just hits you as like a big wall of white space, of white noise, and so you want to like let players kind of be able to read. Oh, there's 4 separate lines here. I'm going to easily jump down to the next line. Yeah, people talk about like giving text room to breathe when they're talking about typesetting their game. Okay, so this is another thing when you're choosing your typefaces and fonts and things. You need to be careful about what characters are supported. So this is like the first thing I found on dafont.com. It's a really cool looking typeface, and it's got some like really awesome caps, and it did support lowercase, but it has no support for numbers, and no support for any character, any like unique characters, any like punctuation and stuff other than underscore. And so you just have to be aware of that. If you're like, okay, I'm never ever going to need any numbers or any punctuation or anything in my game, I'm okay using this typeface. But you're it's a risk. If 2 weeks down the line, 2 months, 2 years down the line, you're like, oh, I need to put in some numbers and I really want to use this typeface, then you're stuck. So yeah, check that beforehand. And the same thing applies to languages. You might not think about, as PPS says, like it's dangerous for localization. Like even just having accents over letters, if you have a decent number of accents over letters, you can localize to most European languages. Like that's a really big difference, like step one. And then you're pretty unlikely to find a typeface that also supports like Japanese and Korean and Chinese. You're pretty hard pressed to find that. But I don't know. At least try and look for European characters, at European character support. When you make the sequel to your game, it will just be My Game 2 instead of My Game 2. Yeah, that's good. I recently added accents to my font in anticipation of its localization. Yeah, that's a whole other kettle of fish. Well done, love for doing that. But yeah, actually, in terms of what accents you would need, I don't know. I'm not really an expert on European languages and also which languages you support and which characters are within those languages. I'm sure there must be resources out there. If you want to localize to just French or French and German, Italian, there's like sort of a standard set that people go down the list of priority, unless you're from that country, and then you'll start with your native language first. Makes sense. Yeah, there must be resources online. I'd be kind of curious for just a list of these characters, like English is this character, and then like French is these, plus these accents. Yeah. It's cool. Oh, this is fun too. Oh, I covered all the basic extended accents. I thought I made it enough. Yeah, for the romantic languages. Yeah, I guess. I'm not sure like how many. Yeah, they need. There must be some reference online. Lloyd says, yeah, I work on an MMO, and because we have chat in game, we have to support every language, even the ones we haven't localized to. Oh yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Player-entered text. Even without making an MMO, if you want to let players name things in your game, you might end up needing to support that. I know Overwatch does that, but it doesn't do it very well. So the actual the typeface for English is one set, but then as soon as you add in characters that are not supported in that, it just defaults to what looks like Arial or something fairly vanilla. And the typeface in Japanese looks really significantly different to the English one. I mean, it doesn't matter too much. If you only ever play in Japanese, you won't know, and it still looks cool within itself. It's just very different to what I'm used to having played the English one. But yeah, if you have player-entered text, you're going to have to think about that. Even if you just have like a fallback to something that's not quite as stylish as your default typeface, at least the characters will be shown. You don't want like a bunch of squares and stuff showing up. Okay, yeah, so this is the next thing. This is one of my favorite things, is to add formatting. So you can use bold and italics and stuff to kind of break up the text. So you could do like this is becoming more and more common, but if you're doing an MMO or some game with little quests, you could put in kind of icons and colored text to make it really clear, and so players can read it just at a glance. They're like, oh, okay, mushroom soup equals open up the shop. Okay, so I gotta go find mushroom soup. Well, that's a low quality screenshot, but yeah, this is from Northgard. So every time they mention a gameplay element, they put an icon next to it. So if you saw crowns on its own there, you might be like, wait, what's crowns again? If you haven't heard it before, but oh, it's got a pile of gold left next to it. Oh, it's the gold money resource. And food is always the big red apple. And then there's like, highlighted text there as well. So like, I think having that support in your engine adds a lot to making your game like readable. You can also use really simple things. So this is Magic the Gathering. They've used italic here to just show flavor text. So like anything to do with gameplay is in normal text, and then this sort of more handwritten style of italic is flavor text. So you know it's interesting, but you don't have to read it. and then some pixel games and JRPGs and things have a lot more fun with the text. And I really love putting this in games. Like, it lets you make like rainbow text, jiggly text. Like, I think it can be really fun. So yeah, don't forget about that being an option. Yeah, it says, yeah, I love making the text like that. It's super fun, right? Makes the game a lot more interesting. So that's most of it. If anybody has any questions and stuff, you guys can throw those in the chat. But if you're interested in like reading more about this, there's a couple of books that I think are really awesome. I have them here. This one, Detail and Typography, is like really thin, but it's like super useful reference guide for, I don't know, how to, a lot of the stuff I covered today is kind of in there as well. So you've got stuff talking about, oh look, this is the shape of the words. Like, so, you know, people when they read alphabet, they're actually just looking at the shapes of things. It's a really good reference book, if you can find it. And then this Elements of Typographic Style is like it's a much chunkier reference thing, but it's still a reference book. It's not like a giant textbook you have to go through. It's yeah, it's pretty good fun if you're into that sort of thing. There's a lot of online things as well. If you just type in like typographic stuff, I don't know, it's you can find it. 4-bit says, I like it when there's different ways of the text appearing, like fading in slowly or slamming at a different scale. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, how the text appears can add a lot of style, especially if you're like revealing it character by character. They like spin in or slam in. Yeah, there's a lot more creativity you can have with text to make it feel a certain way. So yeah, I was gonna play a game or two after this and talk about the kind of appearance of those of the text within those games. But yeah, really enjoyed listening. Sadly, I'm working hard to keep references videos up over the video feed most of the time. Is there any chance this presentation will be available for me to download? Yeah, I could probably share it online. I think this video itself will be up on Twitch later. I'm not sure when it gets put up, but I think it will be a saved one eventually. Yeah, let me write that down. Well, I'll remember that to share the link somewhere on later. I don't know where I should put that. Put that on the Discord probably. If you guys are in the Discord, then yeah, I'll put it there. For now, let's play some games, and hopefully we can see some like real examples of this kind of like style stuff in real games. So yeah, it says, someone's going to ask, when you're talking about line length, this might be a UI thing or a text thing, but how important do you think it is to adjust the size of your text appropriately with your text box? I notice in a lot of modern games, the text just kind of sits at the top left of a giant text box because they have the space, I suppose. But it makes it feel almost amateur and less cozy to me. Yeah, so I would say you can't adjust the text to fit the text box because you want it to be a consistent size. You could maybe, so you wouldn't change the font size. You should get the box to kind of squidge up to fit the text. And then in terms of how many characters are on the line, you could go for a flexible thing. Like you could try and make it so that like, all right, I only want 2 bits of text. I only want 2 lines. So I've got to make that box wide enough so it fits on 2 lines. Yeah, it depends. It's almost like subtitles. When you're doing subtitles, you only ever want like 2 lines of text, and so you end up like picking a kind of a break between the pages such that you only have 2 lines of text. I think you definitely don't want giant amounts of white space in the text box. So having the box itself kind of squish up to fit the text is probably a good start. Yeah, I don't know if you have any other questions related to that. Just the size of your text appropriately to the text box. I think, yeah, basically the only things you can change is like the size of the box, and then where the new lines are, and then whether you split the text onto multiple pages. So yeah, play with those until it feels good, but make sure you're not over 60 or 70 characters. Snovin says, do you have any recommendations about text effects like text shadows? I found that adding text shadow can make the text much more easier to read in some cases. yes, that's something I should have mentioned actually. I started putting that in Titan very recently, and it's a night and day difference. Having an outline or a bit of text shadow adds a lot, because you're kind of increasing the contrast between the text and the background. If you've only got like white text on a black background, you're obviously not going to have much of a difference. But if you want to have something a bit more interesting, like sort of grayish or blue text on a different color background, then you're going to want to have some way of increasing the contrast. And one way of doing that is putting drop shadow. So yeah, definitely try that as well. That's something I probably should have put in as a point. Pippa says, just an observation, text in old games felt cozier and more like a conversation to me rather than a big text dump in a big box. Or in a tiny box locked into space. I wonder if that's... Yeah, I wonder why that is. Maybe because back in the day people would have to write their own text box code from scratch, and so they would kind of think about these cases. And then now people have a lot of kind of UI widgets and stuff you can throw up, and getting the UI widget to scale appropriately to the thing that's set within it is not... I mean, you can do it, but it's usually like one extra step, and maybe some people haven't done that. They're like, oh, it's displaying the text and the text is wrapping correctly. It might even be because I know I've had this problem in Unreal. If you set the text to wrap within the box, then you can't then set the box to squish up to the size of the text, because you can kind of see how those two things might fight each other. There is a way of solving it, but it's like not immediately intuitive. So maybe that's why people have done that a little bit. Are there any things you do to take into consideration people who might have difficulty interacting with text? People with dyslexia, visually impaired, etc. I haven't had to do that in my games yet, but there's definitely a couple of ways you could do that. I've heard for people with dyslexia, there's certain fonts that are worse or better than others. If you really wanted to have like good support, I guess you could let them choose a different font or choose a larger font. I'm not quite sure. I know there are some fonts that are specifically made for people with dyslexia. They're like, it's really interesting actually. Each letter form is completely unique. So if you think about in this, for example, the A and the E, what was a better example? Sometimes P and B are basically vertical flips of each other. With a font that's designed for someone who's dyslexic, they often make them look like there's a lot of weight on the bottom. So the letters are like feel heavy. So they're not going to sort of flip. And so I've heard that people with dyslexia find those easier to read because somehow their brain just doesn't flip them as much because they look weighted. And then also the fact that the B is chunkier on the bottom and the P is chunkier in a different way, they don't get flipped in the same way. Font selection, especially in body, might actually be a great thing to standardize in games, considering the body text is not meant for flavor anyway. So yeah, I think that'd be pretty cool for an accessibility thing. I'm not sure what other stuff you could do, because like dyslexic fonts, dyslexic friendly fonts, they don't look bad, but you might want to like let that be an optional thing. You could include it in the game and just have a little checky box and say, boom. 4-Bit Friday says, yeah, I've seen those sorts of fonts. I don't think I've ever seen them used in context of games. Comic Sans option in all games. Actually, I've heard Comic Sans is not bad for people with dyslexia because it's like handwriting and each letter form is unique. It's way more easy to use. As much as people make fun of Comic Sans, it's not really that bad of font. It's maybe overused, but yeah. I think I'm trying to think. Something it wouldn't be too hard to do on the engineering level, just swapping out the fonts. And you could still, maybe you could let them change the size. It's an option. You might have to make sure the UI doesn't like fall over and get too cluttered with a different typeface. But it's definitely doable. Yeah, that's a good point. Any other questions? Let's see what we're gonna play. Oh yeah, I was gonna check out Frostpunk. Frostpunk's got some nice stuff. Yeah. Let's go to this. There we go, while it's loading. Yeah. Your comment about text box size reminds me of how much I used to love it when comics did cool stuff with word bubbles, like having a huge box with a single tiny word in the center. Yeah, I think a lot of the time those are really cool in games too, but it's a case of actually giving the writers or the game designers the tools in order to be able to do that. So like you want them to be able to like set up really large fonts or really large the layout of the text within the box, stuff like that. Having words like a cup at the edge of the bubble. That's cool. Yeah. If you had that, if your game was like a text game, then it would make sense to have that, and have, let designers have that as an option. That'd be pretty cool. Okay, let's see if any of the kind of display and body typeface stuff I was talking about actually makes sense in a real game. So you've got all the flavor in here. This is obviously a custom logo. It's not really a body typeface. It's something they've made from scratch. This is just your standard, like a standard sans serif font. Oh, they've got the drop shadow. You're right. It actually helps. Oh wait, I think the volume's a little bit loud. Let me cut that. Does that work? There we go. That was a bit too loud. Yeah, so you're right. They've actually used drop shadow on the text here to make it stand out. I don't know if you can see that in the stream, but yeah, there's like sort of a light grey there to give it a bit more flavor. So this is kind of an interesting font they've gone for. It's very like all caps, and this W is kind of interesting looking. Looks kind of harsh. Frostpunk menu looks like a pub. It does. It looks like a pub food menu. It's kind of like a hipster pub. You're like, oh, should I have? Do I want the starving or do I want the freezing to death? So yeah, they've gone for all caps on kind of their subheadings thing. And they've gone for like a glow and a drop shadow and the gradient on their heading. This is the same typeface they've gone for. This looks... Oh, it's the same on everywhere. I think they probably overused like caps here, dreaming about sun and food. It seems a little bit harsh. Well, for drop shadows, I found downright to work much better than just straight down, is what I see in Pixelite. But generally, just down generally doesn't seem to improve readability. Ooh, that's a good hint. I think this is what these guys have done. These people have done. They've just done it bottom right, from what I can see there. Yeah, interesting. So they've gone, yeah, all caps for headers and then kind of regular for smaller stuff. Let's see. Oh, so they've picked a different typeface here. I don't know why. That sort of makes sense. So they've gone, this is like all caps, very blocky, very kind of sharp edges style. And this serif font here kind of feels more like turn of the century, this kind of like Victorian, late Victorian style. Doesn't really fit. And then here they've got, what is that, like a slab typeface here? It helps complete the shape. Oh, yeah, that's cool. It's thinking down to, down. If you do the drop shadow straight down, it changes the shape of the letters without providing depth. No, it's smart. Thanks, Forbit. That's really interesting. Yeah, I gotta go and put drop shadow on all our stuff now. Feels like they've split the game settings away from the in-game. What do you mean? Like in-game it looks kind of different? I guess we can go and have a look. These are all a completely different set of sizes. That's the only downside to this. So they've got this, so that's one size. That's a different size. And they also scale when you mouse over them. So I mean, it still feels fairly consistent though. Alright. Let's see what we've got in game. Oh. It's interesting. So they've got all caps here and down here. But then here this is sort of a serif, but it's not really. It's sort of like, it's almost like typewriter style. But then they've got kind of a skinnier looking serif font here, which is kind of Times New Roman-y, but not. It's like skinnier than Times New Roman. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look bad. It's just, oh, and they've increased the kerning there. So there's more of a gap there. Like customize has more spacing there than here. It's interesting. I don't know quite why they've done that. I guess the flavor text is in this serif font, but then other stuff is in this kind of slabby, blocky typewriter font. Interesting. Alright, let's see what it looks like in game. This is nuts how many fonts are on the screen. Yeah, so yeah, there are 3 here. I think I think you can use these more for purpose. I think if they had a little bit more purpose with these, like, okay, flavor text. Well, it's not quite flavor text. Flavor text is in one thing, titles in another. This is sort of a subtitle. It's interesting. I'm not quite sure. Do Stellaris next. I don't know if I've got Stellaris installed on here. I feel like finding one font with different weight spheres is the same font. Feels like a web page thing, top, bottom, small thing. Yeah. I think having like 1 or 2 typefaces and then picking a small number of styles from within there is probably plenty. They really did the drop shadow. It's really great. So this is the same. I don't know which. Is that the same skinnier font that they were using for the flavor text before? It's kind of hard to tell. Much as I like looking at this stuff, I'm not actually that great at like identifying them and being like, oh, that's that typeface, and immediately knowing it's this. I'm not really good at that. Okay. Then we're just going to immediately pause it and just play around in the menus for ages. Ooh, got player entered text. Ah, if only I had like Japanese or something installed on here, I could see if they. Let's see what support for characters they have. Oh, okay. That comes up immediately. That's great. What else have we got? Oh, you can't do pipe or backslash. What have we got? Ooh. It does support some stuff. It looks like @ is not something that's really supported. It's kind of fun. What's we got? Oh, you can't do arrow. I think maybe they just disabled some stuff. Like question mark doesn't work. / doesn't work. New Eden forward. There we go. This is our new place. Great. Okay, so what we got here? Okay, so they're using this sort of slabby font for the small stuff, where it sort of looks like a typewriter. Oh yeah, maybe use bold for titles there. Too bad. It's kind of interesting. Larger text up there is in a serif font. The fonts they've picked are like really great. They're super flavorful and they match the time and the feeling. I think that's like if you nail that, all of this other stuff about getting the correct mix and the number and the like that's kind of secondary. If you pick something that fits, if all of this was in like sans serif or you know Comic Sans, then yeah, it would detract. But you know, picking they've used 3 different typefaces where they could have used 2. Like that's a style thing. It's up to them. I'm surprised the clean Art Deco typeface from the main menu hasn't reappeared. Is that the tall, skinny one that I was talking about? The one that was like kind of looked like Times New Roman? I haven't seen that much yet. I think I saw it when I was playing around earlier. I think it's in here. Is this the one you mean when you say the Art Deco one? It's like the non-serif pub menu one. So this is kind of the same one down here, like the F. I feel they've used even 4 different typefaces in this. Yeah, so they've got one here, and then the body stuff here is all in the same kind of typewriter looking thing. Settings. Yeah, this is pretty interesting. Adaptation is the same as the previous menu but bigger. I do love all the animations on their UI. It's absolutely phenomenal. Like all this kind of moving around stuff. It's so good. Oh, and the way Book of Laws like appears and disappears at the bottom. So cool. Anyway, by getting distracted. So yeah, you can see they've used basically a couple of different. Oops, wrong one. Let's go to economy. Ooh. Ooh. So it seems like they've got 1 or 2 different sizes. Like 1 here, 2. It's the same typeface. Is that the same as the one that was in the previous menu? I think it is. Yeah, so this typeface here is not the same as this one here. See, the E is different. This is what they've used for their titles. It looks more like, you know, like a book, but this is more like a typewriter or something. It's pretty cool. But yeah, it all kind of feels like the turn of the century type thing. Yeah. Alright. We can look at one other game I think I had installed. Let's try. Check out Civ. It's probably got a bunch of text in it. If anybody has any other games that that are interesting to look at, then yeah, throw it in the chat or throw in screenshots of stuff if you want me to have a look at it. Or yeah, otherwise probably do a bit of this and then call it a day. Thanks for asking all the questions and stuff so far. It's been really it's really helpful to have stuff to bounce off of. Okay, now let's boot it up. So for Civ, they've got this kind of interesting looking serif font here, all caps, all caps, all caps. But then there's just a regular looking sans serif font for the body, which is kind of interesting. You can always do that. You can mix like a serif and a sans serif for your title, for your display, and for your body. That's totally fine. I mean, I guess Civilization, you do go through a whole bunch of eras. There's like all the classical period, but then you've got later on, you've got your kind of more modern era. Generally on screens, sans serif is more readable than a serif font. So it would kind of make sense for the smaller stuff to not have all the serifs and stuff kind of being there, being noisy. So yeah, they've got. So that's the other thing you can do is you can do all caps, but you can do what's called small caps. And so small caps is each of the capital letters. The first ones are bigger than the rest of them. So you can see the G in game is larger than the AME in it. So that helps it be a little bit more readable. So you can see the K and the B there sticking out. So that's another option for you to consider. Let me just do a quick game, then maybe we can see some stuff in game. Small caps is how I write on paper. Yeah. Small caps can be very readable. It's fairly quick. Yeah, so they've done the same thing here, like some larger caps things. But the actual body text, which is really small there, like if you tried to keep that as a serif font, that would probably be quite hard to read. And I'm pretty sure they've got a drop shadow on that as well. I think that would be really hard to read because there's quite a lot of noise in the background there. You'd either have to make this area underneath the text very flat, or you would have to use drop shadow, and they've used drop shadow to make it quite readable, I think. Right. Yeah, they've used drop shadow there. Yeah. Sorry, the gameplay text, the gameplay screen is above the text screen, so when I'm looking up like that, that's where the game screen is. Speaking to what you're saying, it's way too much and way too small. Yeah, it's kind of during a loading screen. I think they could maybe have spread out these lines a little bit, made it a little bit bigger. Yeah, it's a little quite a bit there. The same here. It's a little bit wordy. Yeah, it is probably a little bit too much. You're right. All right. So we got. Oh, okay. It's the first time I booted up on this machine, so it's going to explain to me all about the new expansion. Well, I guess we can look and see how they've done text in here. Yeah, I mean, Civ is very heavy, so it's going to have one of the largest amount of text in compared to other games. So they've really, gone nuts. But they've put in icons and things for certain, gameplay elements. They got drop shadow on everything. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So yeah, they've kept up the same thing here. So kind of your subheaders. I don't know if this counts as a header. If there's anything bigger, but yeah, it's all in kind of caps with the small cap style. So capital letters for the start of each word. And then wow, everything's in caps. Interesting. Unit needs orders. I mean, maybe that's a way of showing priority. Wow, everything is in caps. Have they got anything that's not in caps? Okay, tooltips are not all caps, and that's just a really simple. Well, it's interesting. So they've gone for like a sans serif typeface there, but the thing around it looks kind of papery. So it's like a nice balance between modern looking sans serif and then kind of old style papery looking outside, like on the texture. So if we look at the tech tree, oh yeah, they don't have caps here for their descriptions. They've got title with like a nice glow around it and some gradient on the text itself, and then small caps, and then just kind of regular text. There's only like 3 styles in this screen. It looks like a lot. Oh, wait. Okay, so over here they've used their same small caps font typeface, but they didn't put this in small caps. It seems almost like it looks better when it's all small caps. That's kind of interesting. So there's actually like 4 or 5 different things in this screen. So they probably could have like put all these in small caps to make it a little bit more consistent, but it would have made it maybe a bit less readable. I don't know. That's the thing with this stuff, is there's never one concrete, like perfect answer to everything. Like here, classical eras, normal. Interesting. And then yeah, in the tooltips, it's just like plain text with some icons thrown in and some bullet points for formatting. It's kind of interesting. What else can we look at? Civics is the same thing. Oh wow. There's so much text in this. It's amazing. Okay, so they've got like a title here, and then a goldish with a gradient, but that's not small caps. But this one's small caps. So Great Engineer is the same typeface as below, but okay, this is the same. And then they've just gone for like body, and then really, really small text down here. But it's the same sans serif thing. They know to not try and use something that's flavorful like this as a small size. So like, oh, zoom in windows. Yeah, I guess it must be pretty hard for you guys to see on the stream. Sorry about that. How do I zoom in windows? So the other thing I was going to say is, so one of the ways to differentiate between say you've got a sans serif font and you're like, it looks pretty normal. Is it a display one or is it a body one? One of the things that differentiates a display typeface from a body typeface is whether it kind of works well at small sizes. And one of the things you can look at to try and see whether it works at small sizes is, well, obviously try it at small size on like low resolution. So this text down here is still pretty readable, at least for me. It's still fairly clean. And one of the reasons that is something called the X height. So the X height of a font is, or a typeface, is the size of an X, literally the letter X in that typeface compared to, say, a capital letter. So if you've got like capital M and you've got lowercase x, some typefaces the X will be like even less than half, and some they'll be like almost 70-80% the height of the M. And the smaller you write the text, the larger you want the X height to be, because you basically like don't want your capital letters to be 12 pixels high and then your lowercase letters to only be like 4 pixels high. Then you're just wasting like a whole bunch of space and information. You want your capital letters to be 12 and then maybe your X to be like 9 or even 10 pixels high. So like if you and then in vice versa, if you use that same typeface in a larger size, you don't necessarily want your X's to be absolutely like gigantic. So you want those to be, so that would be a display typefaces, one where the X's will be like a little bit smaller. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, if you look up X height, you can probably find out a bit more information about that. Hello, care to the care. Welcome. So yeah, I think that's probably enough for that. There's a lot of UI stuff to look at. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation and the chat and all the things to learn about things, all the things we talked about. Yeah, it was really fun.